In a world carved by the endless clash of steel and sorcery, where power bled from the very stars to pool in the veins of mortals, humanity clung to a fragile and luminous hope. They called this hope the Echelon of 12 Heroes. They were legends cast in celestial light, demigods wielding the divine ethereal essence gifted by the cosmos itself, their bloodlines echoing the primordial might of the elder beasts. They were the gilded shield against the void-spawned terrors that clawed and slithered at the frayed edges of reality. The shining, unwavering promise of order in an age defined by blood and chaos. Their visages were etched in stone and stained glass, their names whispered in prayer and song. But every brilliant light, no matter how divine, must cast a shadow. And in the darkest, forgotten corners of the realm, the truth festered like an untended mortal wound, poisoning the very foundations of their gilded age. This is the story of the man they threw into that darkness, the humble knight who would crawl back out not as a man, but as a god of ruin. His name was Kaelen. He was born in a forgotten frontier province, a wind-swept land of grit and granite, where life was hard and glory was a distant fairy tale. His spirit, however, was forged in the fires of loyalty and an earnest, almost painful devotion. But the body that housed this spirit was a cruel jest of the gods. He was cursed with a frail constitution, a vessel of flesh and bone, prone to weariness and ache, and his lineage was barren of the ethereal essence that marked the great and powerful. He was a sparrow dreaming of soaring with eagles, a flickering candle in a world of blazing suns. Yet he refused to yield. He trained until the sun bled into the moon and rose again. He bled onto the packed earth of the training grounds. He pushed his meager, protesting limits until his knuckles were raw pulp, and his lungs burned with the fire of 1,000 needles. He did it all for the singular, impossible dream of standing beside the heroes he worshipped. His loyalty was a pure, unwavering flame, a beacon dedicated above all to one man, the first hero, the radiant sovereign. This was the man who had found a determined boy on the fringes of the world, taken him under his wing, and shown him the meaning of greatness. To Kaelen, the sovereign was more than a mentor. He was the living embodiment of justice, the very soul of the Echelon, a father forged in light. He would have faced the abyss for him. He would have died for him without a second thought. And in the end, that was precisely what they asked of him. The betrayal came not with a thunderous declaration of war, not with the clash of armies on a blood-soaked field, but with a told, quiet whisper in the hollowed, silent halls of power. Kaelen, in his unwavering diligence, his meticulous attention to the duties no one else desired, had stumbled upon a truth not meant for his loyal eyes. It was a ledger of shadows, a cryptic accounting of resources and lives diverted, a chilling hint of a conspiracy that stained the Echelon's golden legacy with the color of dried blood. His heart pounded with a naive, unshakable trust as he brought his discovery to the radiant sovereign. He expected commendation, a furrowed brow of concern, a call to action. Instead, he was met with a silence so profound, so chilling, it seemed to drink the very warmth. He looked into the eyes of his mentor, the eyes that had once held such wisdom and warmth, and found only cold, calculating pits of ambition. The world, once so solid beneath his feet, tilted violently on its axis. The heroes he idolized, the living legends of his time, materialized from the grand chamber's shadows. Their faces not masks of rage, but of grim, detached necessity. They did not shout, they did not rage. They did not offer a single word of explanation. They simply broke him. His sword, a symbol of his oath, was shattered under a hero's armored heel, the sound a sharp, final crack that echoed the breaking of his own spirit. His armor, a symbol of his oath, was stripped from him piece by piece, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. His body was beaten until consciousness became a distant, fading shore, and the world dissolved into a smear of pain and confusion. He was branded a traitor, a spy who sought to destabilize the realm for a rival power. The pronouncement was made from the sovereign's own lips, his resonant voice ringing with a perfectly crafted false sorrow, as he condemned the very man who had offered him nothing but absolute fealty. Kaelen was dragged through the streets of the capital, a broken thing paraded before the masses. The jeers and filth of the crowd were a physical assault, each stone and curse a fresh wound upon his shattered spirit. He was cast down, deep into the earth, into the most lightless cell of the Blackvault, a subterranean prison carved from obsidian and despair, reserved for the unforgivable. There, in the suffocating stench of hopelessness and abandonment, he was left to rot. The world he had fought so hard to protect, the people he had sworn to shield, had not just forgotten him, they had gleefully buried him alive. Days bled into weeks, weeks into a timeless, gnawing agony, where the only marker of time was the slow decay of his own body. Hope was the first thing to die, starved in the suffocating silent dark. His body followed, wasting away until he was little more than a specter of skin stretched taut over a lattice of bone. As the final, rattling breath escaped his cracked lips, a strange, deep tremor shook the very foundations of the prison. The cold stone floor beneath him did not quake. It split apart, peeled back as if by an unseen, colossal hand. From the ravenous abyss that opened below, a pulse of absolute, soul-crushing dread washed over his fading essence. It was a forbidden relic, an artifact of myth, sealed for millennia in the primordial heart of the sunken necropolis that lay dormant beneath the Blackvault. It was the source of whispered nightmares, a prison for something ancient, unspeakable, and utterly alien, the contained essence of an abyssal scourge. Before his spirit could dissipate into the ether, it was ensnared, violently torn from its mortal trajectory, and dragged down, down, into the pulsing obsidian heart of the artifact. An unholy union was forced upon him. His dying mind, the last flickering ember of Kaelen, screamed as it was plunged into a maelstrom of primordial hunger. This is a fictional sci-fi story. Narrate and reformed, rotted and regenerated in an agonizing, blasphemous cycle. Death was denied its prize. From the crucible of this monstrous rebirth, something new emerged. It wore Kaelen's face, but the soul within was now a fractured mirror, reflecting the endless, starless abyss. He was no longer a man. He was a vessel, an unkillable thing forged in the fires of betrayal, and now irrevocably bound to a living cataclysm. He awoke to the sensation of power. It was not the clean, warm light of ethereal essence he had so coveted. This was a raw, volatile, and profoundly cold energy thrumming where his heart should be. It was the Cataclysmic Core, a parasitic fusion of his last spark of human defiance and the Scourge's monstrous, insatiable might. A voice, not his own, echoed in the deepest chambers of his mind, a silken, sibilant whisper, promising strength unimaginable in exchange for a world of ruin. He rose. The heavy chains that bound his wrists and ankles, enchanted to hold beings of immense power, did not shatter. They simply turned to rust and crumbled to dust at his touch, their magical integrity consumed. The iron door of his cell, forged to withstand titans, buckled and tore like wet parchment as he pushed it open with an indifferent hand. The guards who rushed toward the sound of rending metal were the first to witness the horror of his new existence. Their enchanted swords struck him, biting deep into his flesh, but the wounds did not bleed. They sealed instantly, tendrils of dark energy stitching the flesh back together with an audible, sickening hiss. Their spells, bursts of cleansing light and pure force, fizzled against his skin, absorbed into the hungry, silent void that now resided within him. Kaelen reached out, not with the practiced, disciplined skill of a knight, but with the raw, predatory instinct of a creature that had never known restraint. Tendrils of pure, solidified shadow erupted from his arm, lancing through the guards' armor and bodies. He felt a sickening jolt of raw energy surge through him as the core feasted on their dying essence, on the last sparks of their life force. He grew stronger with every life he extinguished. The Blackvault, a fortress of despair that had stood unbreached for 1,000 years, began to crumble around him. Stone turned to sand, iron warped and melted into slag. He walked through the escalating chaos, a silent. By the time he stepped out into the cold moonlight, the legendary prison was nothing but a crater of smoking rubble, a tomb for all who had been left inside. He had been reborn not as a hero, but as the living, breathing disaster they themselves had created. News of the Blackvault's impossible, utter destruction spread like wildfire, a mystery that sent tremors of fear through the Echelon's hallowed halls. They dispatched one of their own to investigate the anomaly, a hero whose very name was a synonym for invincibility, Valerius, the Iron Sentinel. A mountain of a man clad in enchanted, celestial steel. His power was the concept of absolute defense made manifest. He arrived at the crater, the ground groaning under his weight, to find a lone figure standing in the epicenter of the devastation. It was Kaelen, his appearance subtly yet profoundly changed, his eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent purple light. Valerius felt no recognition, only the deep, instinctual revulsion one feels in the presence of a void-spawned entity. He condemned the creature before him, his voice booming with the righteous authority of a god. The battle that followed was not a duel. It was a collision of two irreconcilable concepts. The Iron Sentinel was the immovable object, his layered defenses and impenetrable aura deflecting every conventional attack thrown at him. But Kaelen was no longer conventional. He did not attack the shield. He attacked the very concept of stability that upheld it. His chaotic energy seeped into the ground, turning the solid earth into grasping, jagged tendrils of rock that clawed at the hero. He did not try to break the armor. He simply let it break itself against his perpetually regenerating body, weathering blows that could shatter mountains with a terrifying, silent patience. Valerius, for the first time in his storied life, felt the unfamiliar sting of fatigue, which soon curdled into desperation. He unleashed his ultimate technique, a blinding, descending pillar of divine energy meant to purify all corruption from existence. Kaelen simply stood his ground and accepted the blast head-on. The pain was immense, a fire that threatened to incinerate him from the inside out. But the Cataclysmic Core shrieked with an unholy, ecstatic delight. It gorged on the pure ethereal energy, a feast beyond its wildest, most ravenous dreams. Kaelen's body contorted violently, shadows wrapping around him like a burial shroud as he absorbed the very power meant to destroy him. When the blinding light finally faded, he was larger, his form less human, his eyes blazing with stolen divinity. With a speed that defied the laws of nature, he lunged forward. His hand, now clawed and reefed in abyssal energy, plunged through the Iron Sentinel's supposedly unbreakable armor as if it were glass, and ripped the hero's core of power directly from his chest. The core in Kaelen's own chest pulsed with a greedy, triumphant beat, absorbing the stolen power in a single violent gulp. He had not just defeated a hero, he had consumed one, body and soul. The victory left Kaelen reeling, not from injury, but from the shock of revelation.
The influx of stolen power brought with it a torrent of alien information from the Cataclysmic Core. He finally understood the terrifying Faustian bargain to which he was now bound.
The core didn't just crave destruction for its own sake. It was a tool of monstrous evolution. Every enemy defeated, every structure leveled, every life extinguished was not merely an act of vengeance. It became raw data, raw energy that the core used to systematically rewrite his very existence, to adapt and to grow. He could evolve beyond all mortal comprehension, but the price was his humanity. Each evolutionary leap, each new plateau of power would pull him further from the man he once was, closer to the mindless, all-consuming scourge that slumbered within the heart of his new power. The whispers were its voice, a constant siren song luring him toward the sweet, silent release of total oblivion. This horrifying truth ignited a new, desperate purpose within him. He had to understand what he had become, not just for vengeance, but for his own survival. He became a ghost, a rumor haunting forgotten libraries and delving into the crumbling, forbidden ruins of ages past. He hunted for any mention of the Abyssal Scourges, for any scrap of lore that could explain the apocalypse blooming within his chest. In the dust-choked, silent annals of a lost civilization, buried deep beneath a forgotten desert, he found it, a direct reference to the edicts of the Celestial Accord. These were the sacred laws, the very foundation of the Echelon's authority and their divine right to rule. The ancient texts spoke of the scourges as an ultimate cosmic taboo, a power so profane, so antithetical to creation, that its mere existence could unmake the world. And the authors of these edicts, the ones who had banned and hidden this power, were the very first echelon of heroes, generations upon generations before the Radiant Sovereign. The lies were older and deeper than he could have ever imagined. The heroes hadn't just betrayed him. They had built their entire world, their entire religion of justice, upon a foundation of carefully guarded secrets and profound hypocrisy. The death of the Iron Sentinel sent a shockwave of terror and disbelief through the Echelon's hallowed halls. The Radiant Sovereign could no longer dismiss the events at the Blackvault as a mere prison break. The traitor, Kaelen, had somehow bonded with a forbidden power, a power the Sovereign recognized with a dawning, stomach-churning horror from the deepest vaults of his own secret knowledge. This was not just an escaped convict. This was the manifestation of his greatest fear, the very reason he had built his meticulous world order upon a bedrock of lies. The Sovereign acted with the chilling precision of a master manipulator. He mobilized the Echelon's most elite and shadowy forces, the Purifiers, silent assassins who moved like ghosts and killed without a trace, their loyalty absolute, their methods unspeakable. Then he addressed the world. His voice, laced with a finely manufactured grief, echoed from every communication crystal in the realm.
He painted a new portrait of Kaelen. He was no longer a simple traitor. He was a monstrous entity, a void terror wearing a familiar human face, the unholy beast responsible for the destruction of the Blackvault and the brutal murder of a beloved, venerated hero. The propaganda was ruthlessly effective.
Kaelen became the realm's most wanted enemy, a boogeyman to frighten children into obedience, a nameless, faceless monster to unite the people in fear under the sovereign's benevolent, watchful protection. The hunt began. Kaelen found himself relentlessly pursued, not just by knights and mages in the Echelon's livery, but by the very people he had once sworn his life to protect. Every town was a trap, every forest a potential ambush. His quest for vengeance had become a desperate, world-spanning war for survival, a one-man battle against the suffocating, global web of lies his mentor had so expertly spun. Hunted and utterly alone, Kaelen fled toward the only place he had ever called home, the desolate frontier province of his birth. He sought refuge in a small, secluded village nestled in a valley, a place untouched by the grand politics and gilded corruption of the capital. Here, in the quiet tranquility he had long forgotten, he found a ghost from his past. Ilara, a childhood friend, now the village healer. Her eyes, when they met his, saw not the monster from the wanted posters, but the quiet, determined, sad-eyed boy she once knew. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, Kaelen felt a flicker of his old self, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold fire in his chest. He allowed himself to hope that someone, somewhere, still believed in him. But the Echelon's reach was long, and its memory was unforgiving. The purifiers descended upon the village like a silent, silver plague, their polished blades glinting in the twilight. They cared not for a trial, nor for witnesses, only for extermination. A battle erupted in the heart of the village, a storm of steel and shadow. Kaelen fought with a desperate, controlled fury, trying to harness the destructive torrent within him, to shield the innocent from the war that had followed him home. But the chaos was too much. In the heat of the fight, a stray, volatile blast of his abyssal energy, meant for a flanking purifier, went wide. It struck the village's ancient spirit tree, a colossal living monument that was the heart of their community, the soul of their valley. In an instant, it withered to black ash, its leaves dissolving into nothingness. The villagers stared in abject horror. Ilara, her face pale with a terror that eclipsed all recognition, looked at him. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, were now wide with pure, unadulterated fear. "Monster," she whispered, and the single word was a dagger of ice plunged into his soul. In that moment, the purifiers were forgotten. The greatest blow had been struck. He had become the very thing they accused him of being. Doubt, cold and venomous, coiled around his heart. The whispers of the core grew louder, more seductive, a comforting promise. "They will always fear you. Let go. Let it all end." He fled the village, the brand of monster seared into his soul, more painful than any physical wound. For days he wandered the blighted, empty lands, a storm of self-loathing and despair raging within him. He was on the verge of surrendering to the whispers, of finally letting the scourge consume what little was left of his tortured consciousness and grant him the peace of oblivion. But as he stood on the precipice of that final abyss, a different feeling took root in the barren soil of his soul. Cold, hard, and unbreakable defiance. They had made him a monster. They had twisted the world against him. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. He would not become their mindless beast, a simple problem to be solved. He would become their reckoning. He would master the calamity that dwelled within him, not succumb to it. This newfound chilling resolve guided him back to the source, to the sunken necropolis itself, the wellspring of his curse and his power. He descended into its suffocating, reality-warping depths, a place where the air was thick with the dust of dead eons, and the laws of physics were merely suggestions. There, in the absolute silent heart of the ancient tomb, he communed with the essence of the scourge bound to him. It was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of war for the control of his own soul. He wrestled with the primordial, chaotic entity, forcing his mortal will upon its cosmic, nihilistic nature. He embraced the abyss, not as a slave falling into darkness, but as a king seizing a throne of shadows. The transformation was agonizing, a complete deconstruction and reconstruction of his being, atom by atom. His physical form shifted dramatically, shedding the last vestiges of its soft, vulnerable humanity. Horns of pure, jagged obsidian sprouted from his brow, curving like instruments of war. His skin became a canvas of shifting, shadowy patterns, a living tapestry of the void. His eyes, once human, now burned like dying stars, twin embers of controlled catastrophe. He was no longer a man touched by a monster. He and the monster were one, a single, terrifying entity of focused, intelligent annihilation. When he emerged from the necropolis, the very air crackled with the sheer density of his power. He had risen from his fall, reborn as an overpowered evolution, a living disaster ready to be unleashed. The time for running was over.
Kaelen turned his gaze back toward the heart of the realm, toward the gleaming capital city and the throne of lies upon which the radiant sovereign sat. He no longer moved in shadows. He announced his coming with a display of terrifying, world-altering power, leveling an entire mountain range that stood between him and the capital with a single, focused, annihilating energy. The world watched in stunned, terrified silence as a landmark of millennia was erased in a heartbeat. He sent a message, not by courier, but through every magical communication crystal in the realm, his new, resonant voice echoing directly in the minds of millions. He challenged the radiant sovereign to face him at the fields of valor, the hallowed ground where the Echelon had supposedly won its greatest victory against the void. It was a declaration of open war. The Echelon responded, sending their remaining heroes to intercept him. The Blade Dancer, a woman who moved faster than thought. The Star Caller, a mage who commanded the power of constellations. The Crimson Phantom, a master of illusion and fear. They were the legends of the age, and they came to put down the beast. But they were facing something their legends had no words for. Kaelen met them on the field, a lone, dark figure against an army of champions. He was no longer a berserker lashing out in pain. He was a conductor of an orchestra of destruction. He turned the Blade Dancer's own speed against her, creating subtle temporal distortions that made her a prisoner of her own impossible motion, causing her to crash into her own afterimages. He devoured the Star Caller's cosmic spells, feeding the raw celestial magic to his core and firing it back as corrupt, life-draining energy that turned the very ground to black, dead dust. He shattered the Crimson Phantom's grand illusions with a singular wave of pure, undiluted chaos that revealed not just the hero, but the stark, naked fear in his heart. One by one, he dismantled them. He did not just defeat them, he exposed their vanities, their fears, their hypocrisies, for all the world to see through the broadcasted challenge. He was rewriting their history with their own blood. And the world, once so sure of its shining saviors, was beginning to doubt. At last, as the sun set over the now desolate fields of valor, casting long, bloody shadows over the broken forms of the fallen heroes, he arrived. The radiant sovereign descended from the heavens, wreathed in an aura of pure, blinding light, his face a mask of serene, resolute fury. The very air seemed to bow before his presence. This was the final confrontation, the clash between the betrayed student and the master of lies, the shadow and the artificial light. Their battle was not merely a contest of power, it was an apocalypse in miniature. Light and shadow clashed with such force that the very fabric of reality groaned and tore at the seams. The sovereign wielded the divine aether, the power of creation, order, and starlight. Kaelen commanded the abyssal chaos, the power of entropy, ruin, and the silence between stars. During a lull in the storm of their combat, as the two forces stood locked in a stalemate of cataclysmic energy, the sovereign finally revealed the truth, his voice cracking with the terrible weight of his conviction.
"I did it to save the world!" he bellowed, his voice carrying across the ravaged plains. "I saw the seed of the scourge within your bloodline, Kaelen. A dormant potential for a calamity that could unmake everything. I sacrificed you, one man, to preserve the lives of billions. It was a necessary evil." But his justification was hollow, a tyrant's excuse dressed in a savior's robes. As Kaelen gathered his power, preparing to deliver the final devastating blow, to shatter the last bastion of this corrupt and rotting order, his own body betrayed him. A violent, uncontrolled convulsion seized him. His monstrous form tore apart at the seams as a grotesque, shimmering chasm ripped open across his chest. The Cataclysmic Core, pushed beyond all conceivable limits, became a vortex of pure, unbridled madness. Shadowy spectral tendrils erupted from the wound, clawing at the sky like the arms of a dying god. And from the roiling chaos within his chest, a second, ancient, and infinitely vast consciousness stirred and awake. A voice, a symphony composed of 1,000,000,000 screaming souls, and the serene, perfect silence of dead galaxies, spoke directly into his mind. "You have done well, vessel. You have broken the cage. Now let us finish it. Surrender your fleeting will to me. Embrace our union. Together, we will grant this flawed, suffering existence the ultimate gift, the perfect, beautiful peace of total oblivion." It was the Abyssal Scourge deity itself, awake, hungry, and offering him the power to end everything. Kaelen hovered between two infinities, the burning personal desire for vengeance and the seductive cosmic promise of absolute annihilation. The Scourge's offer was a sweet poison, a release from all the pain, the betrayal, the loss. He could unmake the world that had unmade him. He could erase the memory of the man named Kaelen and the monster he had been forced to become. The radiant sovereign watched, his face a canvas of ultimate horror, finally understanding the true, world-ending nature of the cataclysm he had so arrogantly sought to control. But in that final, critical moment, as oblivion beckoned, a single memory surfaced in Kaelen's fractured mind. The terrified face of Ilara. He had become a monster to her, not because he was inherently evil, but because he had lost control.
To accept the Scourge's offer would be to prove her right, to prove the sovereign right. It would be the ultimate, final surrender. With a scream that was both human and monstrous, a roar of pure, unadulterated will that shook the heavens, he fought back. He turned his immense power inward, wrestling the ancient god for the throne of his own soul. "This world is mine to judge," he snarled, not at the sovereign, but at the cosmic entity raging within him. "Not yours to erase." He forced the Scourge's consciousness back down, deep into the core, sealing it behind a prison of his own will. The connection was now known, a permanent scar on his soul, a constant war to be waged, but he was in control. The vortex subsided. He turned his burning eyes, now clear with a terrible absolute purpose, back to the radiant sovereign. The fight was over. The sovereign's light was extinguished, his body broken, his empire of lies shattered before the eyes of the entire world. The old order was dead. As the dust of the cataclysm settled, a new, uncertain era began. Kaelen stood alone, a solitary, terrifying figure who was neither hero nor villain. He was a consequence, a necessary disaster. The world, stripped of its shining false saviors, was left to grapple with an uncomfortable, terrifying truth. But the story was far from over. In the wreckage of the Echelon's most sacred sanctum, the very chamber where Kaelen had been condemned, the final battle had revealed a hidden vault. Within it lay archives that predated the Echelon by millennia. Ancient, brittle scrolls were unearthed, and on them a new and chilling prophecy was inscribed. It spoke not of heroes or scourges, but of a master manipulator, a godlike entity hidden in the deepest shadows of existence, a being called the Silent Weaver. This entity, the scrolls claimed, had orchestrated everything since the dawn of time. It planted the seeds of the Abyssal Scourges and engineered the rise of the Echelon, creating a perpetual cosmic cycle of calamity and salvation, betrayal and ascension, all to feed its own unknowable alien purpose. Kaelen's tragic journey, his burning quest for revenge, had been nothing more than the opening move in a cosmic game he never knew he was playing. His victory was not an end. It was merely the first tremor, a signal that a new, impossibly powerful piece had just been placed on the board.